Well, good morning. How you guys feeling today? Good. Wow, you guys are getting better at this every time. I love it. Awesome. Good. Maybe you've been having the coffee, like I said, so it's always available when you walk in, and the donuts, and I hope you're enjoying that. Listen, I know I don't look like it. I'm kind of pretty skinny, to be honest, but I always wanted to play football. I always wanted, my whole life. When I was growing up, I don't know what it was. I just thought it was so cool. You know, you're in these pads, you get to smash into people, and so I had grown up with my grandmother, and I had always asked her, can I play? And she was always concerned that I was going to get hurt. So she'd be like, no, people get hurt playing football. I'm like, yeah, but it's so much fun. Well, this is the only sad part. When she passed away, I was still in high school, and so I still had a senior year left. And so I tried out for the football team because I'm like, I'm going to play. This is my chance. I'm going to go and I'm going to play. And they accepted me because they accepted everybody in the school that I went to. So I made it on the team. And then they put me on special teams. So I'd never played football except for I went out in the summer for what they call double sessions when you're training. And then that fall it started. And they put me on special teams. Special teams is not the normal playing team game. It's the one you do kickoff and you do punting. That's a whole different crew that's in there. And so on the kickoff, very first play of the season, very first game, I'm in the game. And I'm on the very far end. So, you know, when they kick off the ball, we're kicking off to the other team. I'm one of the ends. And my assignment is to make sure, if you're on the end, that nobody gets to the outside. Because if they get down the sideline, you've probably seen it. And they run all the way down, they get a touchdown. And so the coach is like, just make sure they don't get outside of you. And I'm like, okay. So they, everything goes, he kicks the ball, and I'm kind of nervous, and so I'm just one of those people, when it's my first time, I kind of stay back a little bit, right? I don't, charge up ahead, so I'm running a little bit behind everybody. I'm watching the game. This guy catches the ball. He starts running. He starts coming over to my end, and I'm like, containment, I got to get this guy, and all I can think of is I got to tackle him, and he's a bit bigger than me, and he looks a little stronger, and he's getting by everybody, because remember, I'm kind of behind everybody, and so he starts coming around the end, he's coming toward me, and I'm like, containment, but I'm thinking, got to get this guy, so he comes right at me, barrels into me, I hold on for dear life. I mean, the guy drags me 5 yards, I'm just thinking, I got to get this guy, I got to hold on, and of course, reinforcements come, and boom, they tackle him, but he'd made it pretty far down the field. So when I'm coming off the sideline, the coach is screaming at everybody, why didn't you tackle him? Solaroli, why didn't you contain him? And get on the bench. And I'm like, you're benching me? I tackled him. I'm the guy who grabbed him. I'm the guy who stopped him. I'm thinking, how could you do this? And then I'm kind of tapping, Coach, get down there, Solaroli, sit down on the bench. And I'm like, okay, all right. And he didn't let me play the rest of the game. He's all upset with me. And at the end of the game, I'm like, what happened, Coach? Maybe you didn't see it, Coach, but I was the guy who caught him. You didn't contain him. He's yelling at me, and I'm like, but I was the one who tackled him with a bunch of help. And but I did it, and so he's like, forget about it. And so next week, I'm in practice, and I'm talking to all the coaches. I'm politicking. What happened, Coach? Did you see it? Can you go back and watch the game? And this is going on for days. For days, I'm talking to people, days, until one time this assistant coach looks at me, and he goes, Solaroli, just forget it. Nobody cares. And I was like, it was like somebody just hit me with a hammer. What am I doing? What am I obsessing over? I'm pushing and pushing for what? These guys, I'm bugging them to death over this missed tackle because I was upset that the guy had put me on the bench. I mean, did you ever do something or push something way beyond what you should have pushed it? You went to a party, right? Everybody cleared out hours ago, and you're still sitting there, and the hosts are falling asleep. You ever done one of those things? You're like, my grandmother always had this saying, John, never overstay your welcome, right? She was like, always leave early. If they invite you somewhere, leave early. Don't just keep staying there. Or maybe you stayed at a job that you knew you should have left, and you're like, I know things are not going to work out, but you keep staying there. You're staying there until it ends up crashing. Either yell at the boss, or something weird happens that you knew was going to happen and get fired, or something happened. Or maybe you held on to something when you should have sold it. You're like, now's the peak of the time, the peak of the market. Let's sell it, but you held on to it, and then it ended up holding on to it too long, and it just ended up burning on you. And maybe you pushed a relationship, right, that needed to end, and you just kept hanging in there for whatever reason it was. You're in there and in there until finally it blows up, and then you're like, okay. So oftentimes we stay in things longer than we should because we're trying to force an outcome and hoping that it will happen in our lives. And this kind of thing leads us to a little bit of a bigger question. Why do we keep pushing our own way? In those moments when it finally crashes, right? When it finally falls apart, we get this like epiphany. Hindsight is 20/20, and we look back and think, wow, I should have stopped this a long time ago. Man, I should have done something different. And we realize this in that moment, and it can cause us to wonder, why didn't I do it earlier? Why did I have to keep pushing? And it leads us to another question, which is, what happens when it comes to God in our life? Right? Sometimes when you're in those situations, you're wondering, is it me, God, that I keep pushing forward, or are you guiding me to do this? Because there's sometimes when we're in a difficult position that we're supposed to keep moving forward, despite the odds, because God's going to do something in the middle of it. But would it cause us to wonder, am I following your will, God? Am I doing what you wanted me to do? Is this the right direction that I should be heading in? Because I kind of think it is, but I'm not 100% sure. Because after all, if I'm in the wrong direction, then God could be doing something else, and I could find myself actually doing something that God doesn't want me to do. And so we get caught sometimes in these moments of like, when should I be pushing forward? And when is it me, or when is it God? Well, if that's you today, I think today's message is going to help you. We are starting a brand new series, like my wife up here, Carolina, letting you know that we're starting the series of Esther. The book of Esther is an Old Testament book, and it's an incredible book. And the series is called Courageous, Finding the Strength to Do the Impossible. And in this story, Esther is this woman who faces impossible odds. And she keeps pushing forward. She decides to push forward, and she ends up saving a whole nation of people. She ended up saving the Jewish people. And most of us would love to be in a situation where we're facing the impossible, as long as the impossible comes through, right? Have you ever been in one of those moments or situations where you're praying about it? You're like, I'm really hoping this is going to come through. But none of us want to hope in vain, right? We want to make sure or hope that it really comes through. So Esther, though, is this very unusual book. The interesting thing about this book is God, of all the books of the Bible, God is not mentioned one time in the book of Esther. It's true. He's not even mentioned one time. Neither is prayer or meditation. None of these things are mentioned in the Bible. But God's fingerprints are everywhere as we go through, and we're going to find that out and see that as we go. But when you fight God's providence, because the book is really about God's providence, even though his name isn't there. When you fight God's providence, then you'll never win. You'll always lose. But when you're in alignment with God's providence, you can't lose. And that's where most of us want to be there. We want to be in God's providence, knowing that we're doing what he wants us to do. And so as we go through this book, we're going to see Esther push forward against all odds. How do you and I know that we're on the right track? How did she know she was on the right track? And how do we know we're pushing through with our way, not our way, but God's way? So is there an area of your life right now where you're wondering the same thing? I don't know. We're going through a lot in this season with COVID and jobs and relationships and all sorts of stuff, and people in their homes are in jeopardy. And how do we know where we're going? Don't we want to know the answer to those questions? Is the relationship that you're in right now and you're wondering, should I keep pressing forward, or should I get back off of this? I don't know. A lot of times we feel like this is the right thing, but we're not sure. Do you believe that God has called you to do something and you're wondering if you're on the right track? We're going to find out as we head into the first chapter. So we're going to pick it up in chapter 1, verse 1. It says, "Now it came to pass in the days of Ahasuerus." This was Ahasuerus who reigned over 127 provinces from India to Ethiopia. In those days, when King Ahasuerus sat on the throne of his kingdom, which was in Shushan, the citadel, that is in the 3rd year of his reign, he made a feast for all his officials and servants, the powers of Persia and Media, and the nobles, the princes, and the provinces being before him, when he showed the riches of his glorious kingdom and the splendor of his majesty for many days, in fact, 180 days in all. And when these days were completed, the king made a feast lasting 7 days for all the people who were present in Shushan, the citadel, from the great to small, in the court of the gardens of the king's palace. And there were white and blue linens, curtains fastened with cords of fine linen, and purple of silver cords, and marble pillars. And the couches were of gold and silver, on a mosaic of pavement of alabaster, turquoise, white, and black marble. And they served drinks in golden vessels, each vessel being different from the other, with the royal wine in abundance, according to the generosity of the king. In accordance to the law, the drinking was not compulsory, for so the king had ordered all officers of his household that they should do according to each man's pleasure. So he's throwing this giant party with 127 different provinces that he had, and all the leaders are there, and then for the city. And so the first thing I would like you to note in your outline is this. If you want to follow along, pull out that outline, you can fill in this. All the money in the world can't buy your way. All the money in your world can't buy your way. Now, as we get into this, I want to set up this story a little bit more, and it's going to make sense in a moment. But if you want to understand the Bible a little bit better, the Old Testament Bible, and how it pertains to the Jewish people, you have to know about 5 different dynasties or empires that existed. And they're right up here on the screen. And the first one was the Assyrian Empire. And the Assyrian Empire was about 911 to 609 BC. Now, the Assyrian Empire, what's notable about that is that the Jewish people, at one point, as the line of kings divided from the tribes of Judah and Benjamin to the south, and then there were 10 tribes of Israel to the north. They were called Israel, and the other people were called the Jews, or the Jewish Judah. And now, during the Assyrian Empire, go back, please. The Assyrian Empire, they take 10 of those tribes captives. That's what the Assyrians did. And they take them away, and they disperse them, and they bring some people back into the land. And those people became known as the Samaritans, the area of the Samaritans. And the reason the Jews hated the Samaritans is because they thought they were half-breed Jews. And so that would happen during the Assyrian Empire. Then the Babylonians took over. Now, these are notable kingdoms because they took over most of the known world at the time. And it went from one to the other. Then the Babylonian Empire took over with King Nebuchadnezzar, and that's when they defeated Judah and Benjamin, the last 2 tribes, and brought them away captive to Babylon. And then the Medo-Persian Empire, which we're talking about right now. Now, the Medo-Persian Empire took over, and the people of Israel, the Jewish people, are still captive, and they allow them to go back and rebuild the temple during that time. And then the Greek Empire takes over from them, and during that time, what happens is that they try to control the population of the world by changing the language to Greek. And that way, most of the world spoke Greek. And that's why in the Bible, a lot of the people spoke Greek and Hebrew. And in doing that, he paved the way for Christianity because the whole world spoke a common language. And so when Paul would go somewhere, if he spoke Greek, almost everybody could understand him. And then the Roman Empire took over, and the Roman Empire had a significant effect on Christianity in that they built roads because they were trying to move their troops all over the world, almost everywhere. And those roads paved the way, literally, for people to travel and bring the gospel to most of the known world. And I know that was a lot, but that's just something, a little bit of history that we're going to go through. But go to the next slide now. The Medo-Persian Empire is where we're at, the setting for the book of Esther. And if you see in the green highlighted areas, that's where they took over. They took over what was then most of the known world, even down into Africa, down here near Egypt, all the way over here into Asia, and up over here into Europe. And so about 60,000 Jews during that time returned to Jerusalem. But there's still a couple million that are living at the time of Esther, and this takes place right over here. Babylon, by the way, was right here, but Shushan is the capital right here. Jerusalem is way over here. So about a couple million are still over on the other side. Now, they'll go back later to build the city walls under Nehemiah and a few others. So I hope your head's not spinning too much at this moment. But Ahasuerus, his father was Darius the Mede. And Darius the Mede wanted to move up into Asia. So you see over here by Greece, way over here, or Europe, he wanted to move into that area. And when he went over there to fight the Greeks, there was a famous battle at Marathon. He wanted to take over Athens, and he's kind of mad at the people of Athens because they had defended some cities here in Turkey, some of their own Greece places, and they put some reinforcements. So he's so mad he wants to take out Athens. And he goes to Marathon at the beach, which is 26 miles away from Athens. He's going to board all of his troops there, and then he's going to go over to Athens. But they end up defeating him there. They sit there at the beach so long, he gets back up on the ships, and then they come down and they take out like about 2,600 of those, or 6,000 people, almost a quarter of their army. And then he goes to sail to Athens, and then they take their troops and make it to Athens. In fact, they run that 26 miles, and one of the messengers goes, and that's why we call a marathon, by the way, a marathon, 26 miles, if you didn't know this. And when they show up with their ships, they see the army's already there, and he leaves defeated and despondent. Okay, now this is important because 10 years later, Ahasuerus, who we're reading about right now, he wants to go back and take revenge on what they did to his father. And because of that, he's having this giant party. You see, he's trying to make life happen. He's trying to gain support. He's asking all the leaders of his areas, these 126 provinces, to come to this party for 180 days. It's 6 months. Think about that. I don't know if it was a rotation of them coming in or not. But at the end, he has another 7-day party, a last week, where he invites them all. And the city's there too. And it's just this great thing because he's trying to display his wealth, his power, and his ability to go back and kick butt over at Greece. Okay? I don't know what's going on with the thing here today. And so he spares no expense. He's got these lavish displays. He invites people into the king's garden, and he's like making these, I mean, can you imagine there's these like gold and silver couches with all these like, with curtaining, and it's like, come and enjoy, and you could have as much wine as you wanted, as much food as you wanted, and he's just showing, this is how powerful I am, this is how great a leader I am, and he's showing all this off. And so he invites these 127 province leaders, they're military leaders, and there's all these people, they're there. And so he's able, because of this, to amass 150,000 people for an army, which he later is going to go back to Greece to fight. And he actually gets a navy of 1,200 ships. And you know the movie 300? Anybody familiar with that? Right? This is Sparta! Okay? That's the movie that's actually based on when he goes back. And at first, they meet those 300. It's a great story. It's actually very close to what the truth was in the history of the Bible, of the earth. And these guys, they lose there, okay? And then he goes back, and they gave them enough time to abandon the city. And so he goes, and he's going to fight again. He brings his ships, and that's the second movie, and they take him out again, and he loses, and he ends up going back. You see, all this money, all this power on display, and everything that he's trying to do, it doesn't buy him the win. It doesn't make him get his own way. He thinks, look, if I impress you guys, if I build up my army, if I go over to Greece, it's going to happen. And here's the middle of it where he's doing all of his campaigning to make that happen. There are times when we need to realize we have to give our situation to God. Long before I met Carolina, my wife, someone introduced me to this other woman to date, to go on a date. Now, she ran a Christian bookstore, and I was a pastor, and so we went on this date, and I thought she was beautiful. I just thought that she was gorgeous, and for guys, that's like it, so I'm like, I'm going to keep pushing it forward on this. We went on one date, and then I call her back up because we were supposed to go on another date, and she didn't call me back, and I'm like, and so I'm talking with people in the office because they're always bugging me about what's going on, and the wives of the people in the office, no. I said, I don't know if I should keep calling her, and they're like, you should call. You should call because she wants you to call her. And I'm like, really? And I'm like, yeah, call her. So I call her, and she doesn't respond again, and I'm like, okay. And I keep getting the answering machine. So now my things are like, hey, I thought you wanted to go out, so let me know. And then my answering kept getting a little bit worse, like, hey, I thought we were going to go out. What's going on? Why aren't you calling me back? I mean, I'm starting to, just bother her until eventually my friend has to come to me and say, hey, can you just cool it with her? She doesn't want to hang out with you. I guess she went back to her old boyfriend. I had become the stalker that you hear about. That was me. I'm like, I'll never be that person. And you realize you're that person because I kept trying to push my way when I should have just let it go. And that's the problem that Ahasuerus has. He can't let go. The guy can't let go in this moment. He's obsessed with what happened to his father. I'm going to go back there. I'm going to teach these Greeks a lesson, and I'm going to make it happen. This is what the Bible tells us is this. Whoever has no rule over his own spirit is like a city broken down without walls. He's like, you're just defenseless. You're nothing if you can't rule your own spirit. And in Ahasuerus, he can't do it. And in those moments, we've all been there. Maybe you have a similar story like mine where you just didn't control your own spirit and it ended up blowing up in your face. He's emotionally motivated to defeat Greece after what his father had done. We're trying to make things sometimes happen in our lives. It happens to every one of us. I mean, I'm not the only one who has a story like that. Maybe it wasn't dating. Maybe it was something else that you were just pushing for. Maybe it was a team that you wanted to be a part of or some group of people that you wanted to join or there was just a school that you wanted to be a part of or whatever it is. And we try and we push. And we try to make it happen in our lives. And we think if we pour more resources behind it, that somehow it's going to work out. That somehow we're going to make it. And that's the trap because sometimes we pour the resources in and we have to keep pouring with the hope that somehow it is going to work out. But maybe for wherever it is, whatever situation you're in right now, maybe it's time to let go. Maybe it's time to say, hey, you know what? I don't need to do that. Maybe it's time to let go and let God do what he wants to do in our lives. Listen to the Apostle Paul. He says, I'm not speaking of being in need, for I have learned in whatever situation I am to be content. And that's the problem. We're not content in those moments. And he wasn't content in that moment. And so he kept pushing forward. But Paul says, listen, we can learn to be content. We can learn to be satisfied with what God has for us and not just keep pushing our own way. Maybe God knows what's truly best for you and me, more than we know, all right? Maybe he knows what's going to bring contentment in your life. But the story continues, and so let's read this. It said, Queen Vashti, that's his wife, also made a feast for the women in the royal palace which belonged to King Ahasuerus. On the seventh day, so at that party, the last 7 days, on the seventh day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, Abitha, Zethar, and Carcass, 7 eunuchs who served in the presence of King Ahasuerus. Go ahead, next slide. To bring Queen Vashti before the king, wearing her royal crown, in order to show her beauty to the people and the officials, for she was beautiful to behold. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command and brought by his eunuchs. Therefore, the king was furious, and his anger burned within him. So the end of the 7th day, the big finale, it's the final day. Now, Queen Vashti has been throwing her own party, probably for all the nobles' wives. And so she's got her own party going on, and she's been entertaining. And there he is. The king's been partying all week. It's the last day. And, all the schmoozing is over. All the political things are done. Any opportunity for him to, smooth things over with his officials is over because it's the last day. And so he's drunk, and he's probably not thinking very clearly. And if you've ever been drunk, you've probably not thought very clearly in moments. And after showing all of his kingdom and all of his wealth has been on display, he has one thing that he hasn't shown off, and that's his queen. And it says that his queen was beautiful. So I can only imagine he's bragging. And maybe during that week, their nobles are coming with their wives, and he's laughing, oh, where did he get her? I don't know what's going on, but he's look, you should see my wife. And in a moment of being drunk and in his pride, because he showed off everything, he's I need these guys to see my wife. And so he sends 7 guys to go to your wife. I can only imagine she's back there, and these guys bust into her party and all right, let's go, queen. It's what? And so she says no, and it backfires. And so listen, if you're filling out in your outline here, following along, a prideful decision leads to division. A prideful decision leads to division. And we're not told why Vashti refused to come. We're not told in the Bible. It doesn't really say. Maybe she was too busy entertaining in that moment. Maybe she was just hey, listen, I don't want to be shown off as some object. Or maybe she was just look, I'm just not going to listen to him right now. I just don't feel like it. But anyway, it doesn't go well. Now just imagine this for a moment, how this looks. There was 6 months of him displaying his power and his ability. He's talking with leaders. He's recruiting them to come to join him in the army. He's doing all these things, and now he's down to this last 7 days where he invites the whole city. This is a grand party. It's out of control. He's doing great, and then all of a sudden, she comes over and says no. He's been doing all of this to impress them, to show them how good of a leader he is, to build their faith in him, that he can win the war, to boost their confidence, that he's got the leadership that they need. And in this moment, at the very end of everything, at the height of it all, he calls her in and she says no. All I'm asking is one simple leadership decision, and I can't have my own wife come in. Imagine how that looks as the leader, what they're thinking, right? Really? You're going to lead an army and you can't even ask your wife to come in here? She won't come in here? Come on. So, of course, he's mad. She says no. And, man, he gets mad. I don't know about you. I can already guess this has happened to you if you have children. And you're in a store, you're in a restaurant, right? And you're asking them beforehand, you prepped them beforehand. Listen, we're not going to buy anything in here. Or listen, I want you to behave and sit in your seats when we're at the restaurant. And you get in there, and what do? I want this. I want that. They want you to buy it, right? And they're going crazy. We said we weren't going to buy anything. Remember? We're going to go after. I'm going to get you something. You're trying to calm them down. Then they blow up in the face right there in the middle of the store. And you're just can you be quiet, please? And you're thinking, everybody thinks I'm a horrible parent, right? That's what you're thinking. Listen, I'm usually a better parent than this, honestly, right? Because you just don't want to discipline them right in the moment and everybody's there. It's so difficult, right? And you're thinking, I wish you could see us at home. They're little angels. That's how good of a parent I really am. And this is his situation. This is what happens to Ahasuerus right there. Look at all the time she always obeys me. I don't know what's going on here. And he's in that moment. He can't get his wife to do something simple that he just asked her to do, to come on out. So how is he, if he can't do this, going to command this whole nation? How is he going to defeat the Greeks? And so he loses face in front of everyone. And so he makes this prideful decision. Like in that moment, maybe he could have gone over there himself and talked to her instead of sending 7 guys over there to go get her. Or maybe he could have like asked her in a different way. But instead of doing that, his pride gets the best of him. And this is what the Bible says. You probably heard this verse before, but pride comes before destruction and an arrogant spirit before a fall. And he let pride take over in his life. Do you ever notice that nobody likes a prideful person? I mean, think about that. Pride is one of the worst things. We all have pride in our lives. And yet we all know we don't like the way it looks in somebody else. We're like, I don't like that. None of us are gravitated toward that prideful person. And yet, it's so funny. We see it in other people, but it's hard to see it in our own lives. Pride is just one of those things that's polarizing. It just divides things. Pride is one of those things that's easy to see, but it blinds us when we have it in our own lives. We're blinded by it. And then we take one step for pride, and then we follow it up so we don't lose face, right, to do another thing. And that's what's about to happen in just a moment. But pride always will drive you to take a course of action that will lead you from God's best. That's what it really does in our lives. And all of us fall to it one point or another, and I've done it in my own life, in my own marriage. I've done it with my kids. I've done it in jobs where I just say, that's it. And then once we say that's it, we decide that's where I'm drawing the line. And it's pride that's holding that line there. Sometimes we just make that decision and we just want to stick with it because pride is holding us there. And pride will divide you and will always keep a wall and a barrier between you and God's best in your life. And so Ahasuerus does this, makes this prideful decision. He emotionally moved in that moment. And then this is what happens after. So he says, then the king said to the wise men who understood the times, for this was the king's manner toward all who knew law and justice, those closest to him being Karshena, Shetha, Admatha, Tarshish, Meres, Marsena, and Memucan, the 7 princes of Persia and Media who had access to the king's presence and who ranked highest in the kingdom. So these princes were like kind of his advisors. What shall we do to the queen Vashti according to the law, because she did not obey the command of King Ahasuerus brought to her by the eunuchs?